Hackers, and welcome to the podcast. I'm Celine, a media graduate with an interest in cults.
And I'm Stephen. I'm Celine's dad. I have an interest in cults. I was raised in one. These days, I work as an organisational psychologist. Welcome to the show.
Okay. Yeah, I just did a hat tip for some reason.
Yeah, there's
no one can
point.
see it.
We don't do the visuals.
We don't do that. No.
So, Celine, what's our topic for today?
Motivation. So I called you. I was sitting on my little lunch break in a field. I was in a little
You're
field.
not a farmer.
No, but England has fields.
Okay.
I went and sat on the field, eating my little vegetarian bean halloumi pita.
Nice.
Yeah. I painted a picture and said we should talk about motivation. And I got big words out, such as intrinsic and extrinsic motivation.
Okay, good. We can get into that.
You know, what's the difference in all of that?
Exogenous and endogenous.
Don't know about that one. I can't tell you that one. But the reason, I guess, I thought about it is because I saw. So Dad's obviously, as many of you know, he's been doing his daily 1-minute updates on Instagram, on the Cult Hackers Instagram, which is very easy to find. Quick plug, it's at Cult Hackers. So you can catch up on those little 1-minute updates if you want. And there was one, a couple of days ago, where you showed the difference because you cycled the same route, but you showed a little picture of yourself about 6 months ago and then what you look like now. And it was mad because you saw such a visual difference in your face.
Because I'd lost weight.
Yeah. And then I was also thinking about recently, as the podcast knows, I've mentioned I've been going to the gym for the last year, and it's literally taken me a year to be able to do a good back weighted squat. This took a year to be able to do that properly with proper form and to be able to actually start adding weight to it, like more than just the bar, because it wasn't safe to do so until you're doing it right. And that's mad. And that took a year, many months, repeated weeks of being miserable and annoyed and fed up and basically turning up every week to fail until eventually I succeeded.
Okay, so what's the point? What's this got to do with motivation?
Because it's about being motivated to do that, because that is so hard. So you just jump the gun just at the end, because that is so hard to motivate yourself, because it's every time you go, like for ages, you're doing something and you do not see the results until much later. Generally, most things take motivation to keep going.
Right. Okay. So we want to explore the topic of motivation, and obviously, because it's Cult Hackers, we will also discuss it in line with how cults do this. Why people are motivated to, I suppose, join cults, stay in cults, maybe even what the motivations are for the cults themselves or the leaders themselves. And
also, my thought was to discuss, I guess, how your motivation might be affected. So if you've been in a cult which has used particular motivational tactics, how that might have an impact on then motivating yourself to do things you want to do. So you spent a lot of time being motivated, potentially extrinsically. We'll get into these descriptions of what they will mean, but you've had a lot of outward motivation pushed upon you to do certain things. Like we've said in, I think, the last episode, people generally don't want to knock on doors as Jehovah's Witnesses, but you got that outward motivation getting you to do it. So we can talk kind of about that sort of thing. And also, once you left, did that negatively impact, do you think, your motivation? Because were you like, you know, or positively, I don't want to do things that people tell me to do. I only want to do things that I want to do, and I motivate myself to do that sort of thing. Just like that whole conversation.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. Let's do that then. So where do we want to start? I suppose.
I know, there's so many things.
Yeah. So I have touched on this topic a bit in the past, and actually the very first of the mini series episodes called The Psychology of Cults, I did discuss motivation there. But this is, as you said in our pre-chat, different energy for this, really. I'm going to get you to drive the conversation because this is the sort of thing you really wanted to talk about. So anyway, what do we say about motivation? So what we're meaning here is essentially something that causes us to do something, I suppose, in its simplest form. Let's try and define it. What do we mean by motivation? It's something that makes us do something, take some action of some sort, I suppose. And you mentioned extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, so maybe that's a good time to bring that up. So what's your memory of those, Celine?
So my sort of memory of this is that extrinsic is motivation that comes from exterior, outside. So that's kind of how I remember it, because extrinsic, like external. So yeah, motivation that's like, say in losing weight, I want to go to the gym so I look skinny, so that I feel good. Could be like about how I look, could be extrinsic, and then maybe intrinsic is more. I'm trying to think of how to word this now, actually.
So I would say feeling good about your weight would be intrinsic, because that's how you feel about yourself. In psychology, we'd call it more endogenous, I suppose. That's the internal stuff, and then the extrinsic is rewards that come from the
so like
outside.
People think I look pretty, so that was what the thing I was trying to think. So because a lot of the time it's used around weight loss, isn't it? You need that they recommend having an intrinsic motivation to lose weight rather than extrinsic motivation to lose weight, for instance. Because not that I think this is necessarily true, can unpick this, but people generally in pop culture, let's say, put a lot more clout in intrinsic motivation. They seem to think that being intrinsically motivated is going to be better, provide better results, be more likely for you to follow through, versus extrinsic motivation.
And I would actually agree with that. I think that is the evidence is quite strong, really, that intrinsic and endogenous motivators seem to be more powerful. They seem to last longer. Whereas if it's external or exogenous, then these tend to be less effective. But that's not to say they don't have any effect at all. And again, we've always got these individual differences that play into this. And it gets a bit complicated because external things can have an intrinsic effect. So, the fact that other people comment, okay, they're external, but that if that makes you feel good about yourself, then that in itself is an intrinsic element to it. So it does get a bit complicated, and it breaks down a little bit, I think.
I mean, every binary is difficult to keep entirely separated, but that's
but I think that the general principle is, you're right, is that things tend to be more motivating if they come from within than from the external. So my experience with the topic of motivation is really through my master's in organizational psychology. So a lot of that was about the workplace. And what I found interesting is sort of trying to use that and putting it onto cultic organizations and seeing which bits fit and which bits don't, which is kind of interesting. And that's some of what I've talked about already, really.
So I suppose the next thing is maybe we could discuss then. So we kind of generally got the understanding of what motivation is, and the different kinds of motivation.
Obviously, before you go on, actually, there's another, like a lot of things, there's different ways of looking.
Secret motivation.
Well, there's different ways of looking at this. So you can talk about external, internal, but you can also talk about towards and away from, positive and negative forms of motivation. So that's also really quite important, I think, when we're talking about this topic, in relation to cults as well, because cults use quite a lot of away from motivations, like the fear. So fear is an incredibly powerful motivator, and in some ways I would say it's perhaps the most powerful motivator, certainly in the short term. And this is part of our evolutionary past, really. We are programmed to be alert to any threats that come our way, and that has physiological effects on us. So it starts to, as we know, it makes our blood pump a bit faster and our heart beats a bit quicker, and adrenaline pumps through our veins and stuff. And that's because this is the fight or flight response, as often gets called. So fear, noticing, being aware that there is some sort of threat to us, is a motivator in itself. And that is very powerful, but again, tends to be more effective in the short term. When it's long term, that creates a chronic anxiety, which is generally considered to be very bad for us, obviously, and that's where
maybe
mental
a bit
health problems.
demotivating.
Yeah, absolutely. We can talk a bit about how cults work with that, because I think there's quite an interesting dynamic there. But anyway, yes, so that's another way. So there's internal and external. There's also towards and away from. Good to think about those.
So the away from, so like you just said, is that like
escape
hell?
Response.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the that's away from? Towards, what's the other?
Yeah, so like rewards. So living forever on a paradise earth, going to heaven, being reunited with loved ones. These are all towards motivators that often attract people in the first place. So I think what's quite interesting is when you recruit, you don't normally kick off with, certainly to a modern day audience, maybe it used to be different, but you don't tend to kick off with the fear stuff. I suppose going back to the old preachers preaching fire and brimstone, they were really frightening people into the churches, weren't they?
I suppose because different times there was an understanding that generally God was real. You just didn't, or like that was kind of in the general consensus for a long time. So it was just about getting you into the right church group, I guess. Different situation.
And people perhaps responded more favorably. Just generally, people probably behave more predictably in relation to fear than they do now, because nowadays I think people don't respond quite as well to that. But yeah, so when I was doing witnessing work as a Jehovah's Witness, we wouldn't knock on somebody's door and say, if you don't become a Jehovah's Witness, you're going to die at Armageddon. That's not your opening gambit. But you would show them a picture of an artist's impression of a paradise earth with all happy people there. So yeah, that would you generally kick off with the good stuff, and then when people come in, then you start to. It's often fear then that keeps people, on the straight and narrow, as it were. Yeah.
So that's kind of I guess accidentally got into it, but like the tactics while in, because I think I'd like to talk about the ways, I guess, motivation changes and how you experience it when you're in the cult, when you leave the cult.
So I'll throw a few theories of motivation at you, Celine, and then we maybe can talk about some of these. I think there's some quite interesting ones that people may have some awareness of. The other thing I wanted to also throw in here is a topic I've wanted to mention for quite some time, and I've threatened to do so. Let's do it now, and that is the famous case or the famous experiment of little Albert. We've talked about this many times, so we need to talk about little Albert. So this isn't a theory of motivation per se, but it is around how people's fears are maybe developed, or you can create a certain phobia or fear in somebody. So the other thing to remember is that motivation is often the thing that starts you doing something, but then it becomes a habit, or it becomes just a learned behavior that you do without thinking. So that's the other thing. That's the other part of this.
And there's always someone that's like, you just got to do it 2 weeks and it becomes natural behavior.
Becomes a habit,
whatever.
exactly. Yeah.
I don't know if that's ever the correct time, but they always tell you, like, do this for like, do this for like 20 minutes and it'll just become natural behavior.
I mean, there's definitely something to that. If you get used to going to the gym every day, then you don't have to think about it anymore. So first of all, it's motivating you to get out and go and do it. But then after a while, it just becomes part of your routine. And this is, I suppose, the relevance
Start
of
to look forward to it, like Pavlov's dog.
Well, yeah. So this
Throwing
is
all of
related
it in.
to that. So Little Albert is an experiment that John Watson did, who was kind of one of the early fathers of behavioral psychology. I've talked about that before. The behaviorist school, I suppose. And this was an experiment where this little boy called, well, they named him Albert in the experiment. His name wasn't actually Albert, but he's called Little Albert. And I think he was about 9 months old, so a very small
Very
child.
little, tiny
Yeah,
Albert.
I think that's when they first started to introduce him to these different things. And then he was just over a year when they did the actual experiment. But they introduced him to various different objects, and he was a pretty brave little chap. He didn't really cry at much. But one thing he didn't like was just somebody banging on a loud bar, metal bar behind him. That frightened him when a big loud bang.
Unsurprisingly,
Not surprisingly, the child didn't like scary noises.
From out of view.
Yeah, that's right. So they realised this was the thing that he was scared of.
I'm so concerned. I don't know the story.
Things he wasn't afraid of was like little furry animals and pets and things. So they let him play with a little pet rat and a rabbit. And
I'm really afraid
of
where this is going to go. Are they going to ruin cute little animals for him?
Yeah. So the rat is the one that they kind of used as an example. So he liked the rat. He used to play with the rat and he was very friendly with the rat. But then what they started to do was bang the bell or bang the bar every time they introduced the rat. And after a few times, obviously, he started to associate the sound of the noise, the thing that frightened him, with the rat. So as soon as he saw the rat, he started to cry. So this is classical conditioning. This is the thing you mentioned with Pavlov's dog, same principle. But this was an experiment that demonstrated that you could create in somebody a phobia effectively, or a fear of something, by creating this this link, this mental
seemingly
psychological
unrelated
link.
things, but you've linked them.
Yeah, that's right. So that's Little Albert. I mean, completely unethical as an experiment. They wouldn't get away with it now.
Poor Little Albert.
Yeah. So nobody really knows what happened to him afterwards. I think there's all sorts of stories went around how it affected him. I don't think it was likely to have affected him for life. Apparently, this effect tended to wane over time. So if you didn't keep reinforcing it, then it would get less strong, which is also quite interesting and suggests this gives us some clues as to why cults and high control religious groups in particular use the same, they keep saying the same things over and over again. Yeah, because it's reinforcing that fear, and it lasts for a while, even without any contact, but eventually it'll wane if you don't keep hearing that same message over and over again. So that's another element of it, I think. So I think what part of the motivation around the away from the fear, which organizations like cults and those sorts of groups do use a lot, I think that's definitely part of their tactics.
That's really interesting. And as well, so you say that obviously it wanes over time. And obviously, though, what we're saying is generally cults don't want it to wane over time, so they keep doing it.
Yeah.
But obviously people do leave despite these kind of away from fear sort of manipulation or like motivational techniques to motivate you to stay in. It is possible to break against it, even if you're being heavily motivated to stay in. Through these kind of fear tactics. Do we have much to talk about there with the psychology in that?
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated because obviously we know that there's also, I guess, what we call, and I always have to say this, I'm not a clinical psychologist, but there is this thing called trauma, which complicates matters because there comes a point where, although I suppose what we might describe as fairly low levels of fear might wane over time, there comes a certain type of trauma where that stays with us. So of course, it is possible that little Albert grew up to be afraid of all sorts of things. Something I didn't mention about that experiment, they actually took it further and noticed that things that were a bit rat-like, like furry coats and things like that, he started to be afraid of those and would cry when he saw those as
That's so
well.
sad.
It is really sad. And I mean, the early days of psychology was the Wild West. It was just horrific, all sorts of terrible things were being done. But anyway, that was one of them. So yeah, we have to be a bit careful that these things sometimes do carry on, and so patterns of behavior are developed as youngsters, and then obviously they can persist, and sometimes we don't even realize why we're behaving in a certain way because the pattern was established so long ago that we've forgotten what it was. We don't even know. And we use this word triggering, I suppose, a lot these days, but essentially that's what's happening. It's something that that is affecting us in a way that we didn't really expect.
I think a lot of people have spoken about the being triggered into a fear response, even once you mentally, I guess, on every level that you could believe it's okay and that the world isn't ending in fire and brimstone.
Yeah,
you still see an article about like war and someone invades here or XYZ fit, or the pandemic when that was kicking off, and a lot of people were like, they didn't believe it, but they felt the fear anyway. Like they got that response.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few other sort of theories around motivation, which are pure motivational theories, I suppose. What we've just described is more about conditioning and I suppose how motivation might be the original thing that gets you to do something, and then there's a
crossing to a new threshold.
But in terms of theories of motivation, there's a number of different sort of categories. There's a category called content theories of motivation. Basically, there's theories that go deep into our basic psychological needs. And then there's others, I suppose this is the easiest way to describe it. There's others that are much more surface. So let's talk about some of the deep ones first. And you'll recognize the first one that I'm going to mention because it's our friend Maslow.
Yeah, I was going to say we're going into Maslow.
Yeah. So did you learn this in school, did you, or was it in university?
I just know it. I don't know where it osmosis. Maslow and his hierarchy of needs.
Yeah, that's it. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I think it's very well known. You can look it up on Google. But Celine, tell us, it's this triangle with various levels. Do you want to tell us what these levels are?
Yes. So at the base of the triangle, we've got physiological needs like air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, and reproduction.
So sexual, I suppose.
Yeah. So your basic needs to survive, really, aren't they? For your survival and the survival of the race.
So these are motivators for us. Our need to breathe probably is the very first one. You literally do anything when you are short of oxygen. You're just floundering, aren't you? Just trying to breathe. And then there's others there as well. Yeah,
the water, the food.
Yeah,
to somewhere to sleep, clothing.
What's next?
Right up the triangle, we've got safety needs, so personal security, employment, resources, health, and property.
Yeah, so this is anything that we feel that we need to feel secure, I suppose. Yeah. And in our society, that includes having somewhere to live and a job, those sorts of things. Yep. What's next?
Yep. Love and belonging. So that is friendship, intimacy, family, and sense of connection. Oh, the cults are loving it in the third part of the triangle, aren't they? They love it here. This is where they've made a corner in their market.
Yeah, and above that?
We've got esteem. So respect, self-esteem, status, recognition, strength, and freedom. Tell you that's another one for the cults, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, and then at the very top, self-actualization, which is a desire to become the most that one can be.
Yeah, so this is, I think, also promised in cults, isn't it? This is the offer often that is made. You will become like this person that you've always wished you could
You'll
be.
become the next Jesus. Yeah,
Well, you're going to
Yeah.
become perfect. You're going to be with God. You're going to find transcendence. Whatever it is that the promise is, it's often right at that level. So a lot of these things promise, a lot of these cults promise these higher level needs.
That top three levels of the pyramid. Yeah. But I mean, some cults are hitting you in those lower levels as well. Because, like the ones that get you on a compound. I mean, they've got the whole triangle, haven't they, them? And a lot of them as well, because even for some of these groups that you think, well, they still live in their own homes, or like they live, they have neighbors of the world, they're just, your next door neighbor could be a Jehovah's Witness, for instance, but because of things like homeschooling, because of things like homeschooling, it leads you into then getting jobs with other members of your community, because you might not have qualifications, which means you won't be able to get a job in a worldly job. So then your employment's also wrapped into these cults, and a lot of cults do that, where you kind of end up working for each other within each other's communities rather than part of the wider group. So I mean, they definitely hit the pyramid wherever they can.
Yeah, and actually even those low ones. So often in Christianity, which obviously Jehovah's Witnesses are a version of Christianity, and lots of these other groups are the same. They'll say things like, if you put God first, if you put your faith in God, then all these other things will come. So that in itself is saying that don't worry about your need to eat and have a place to live. God will look after you if you do the right things. That's a very Christian message, actually. Jesus said something similar. So that's used by these groups to say, yeah, actually, this will be provided for you, even if there's no tangible help that they're giving you. They're saying that put your trust in God and he will provide you with these things. That one of the things about Hertzberg's model that, first of all, I should say that most people have seen this and heard of it, and it's got a lot of traction in business. It's, there is no self-respecting development course that doesn't have an element of Hertzberg in it, but there is very little evidence for it, actually. So
Hertzberg,
sorry, Maslow. I'll come to Hertzberg. There's very little evidence. Yeah, there's very little evidence for Maslow's theory, actually. It kind of makes sense, but there's no real research that really demonstrates this.
Why that order?
So the other thing that I think makes it important is this law of prepotency. So what Maslow claims is that you don't start worrying about the next one up until you've satisfied the lower level.
Very waterfall, to use more business terminology,
I suppose. Yeah. So and again, there's logic to it. So if you don't have enough to eat, you're not that interested in being motivated by self-esteem needs. For instance, the most important thing for you is to get enough food to eat.
See, and that makes sense. But then there's also instances where someone might, because of their self-esteem, which some might call pride, they wouldn't want to accept, quote unquote, a handout to be able to have food, for instance. So things do conflict from above.
Absolutely. And this is one of the problems with it. It doesn't really add up when it comes to that element of it, which is
that
actually
just makes logical
important
sense, doesn't it? But that doesn't mean that's how people behave. We are not logical beings at all times.
That's right. Yeah. But there's clearly something in it in terms of just as a general sort of model worth knowing. That's Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
If you're enjoying the podcast, you can support it by becoming a patron. You can support the podcast for just £1 or $1.50 and receive a variety of Patreon benefits as a thank you.
Don't forget to share the podcast, follow, like, subscribe, and rate the podcast on the podcast app you're using. A review is particularly helpful as it gets us recognised by new listeners. And finally, if you'd like to reach out to us and tell us about some cult hacking you've been involved in, or you just want to say hi, you can do so by going to culthackers.com and using the contact form. We love hearing from our cult hackers. Thank you for listening, and now back to the podcast.
And now are you going to tell us about Herzberg? Because you've
been
trying desperately to tell us about him.
I have. So Herzberg also, I mean, he and Maslow were around the same time, really, and they came from the same humanistic school of psychology. So
I thought you were going to say they were like besties, but
I don't know. They might have been besties. But Herzberg talks about what he calls hygiene factors and true motivators. And with this is used a lot in the workplace.
Okay. So it sounds a bit grim, but like,
hygiene is nothing to do with cleanliness or anything like that. This is, so basically what he says is there are, again, some basic needs that people have. And imagine that as being a line underneath which you have all these basic needs. So again, similar sorts of needs to Maslow's triangle, really. Things like in the workplace, it would be getting paid. It would be the admin of the place that you're working. It would be the working conditions, safe conditions, reasonable working conditions, those sorts of things. Those things are called hygiene factors. So what he said is that you need those things before you're interested in anything else. Those things got to be in place. But as a business, just having those things in place doesn't make people motivated. It just means they are kind of there, but it doesn't make them motivated. You need to do something else to motivate them. And the real motivators for him were things like personal growth and development and feelings of self-esteem and being respected and those sorts of things. So those higher levels. So very similar to Maslow in that respect. But I think his insight was that the things that demotivate people are not necessarily the things that motivate people, if that makes sense. So the admin of the way you get paid, for instance, if that's not working properly, if in a workplace setting, then you're going to get very demotivated very quickly.
Yeah, but if it works properly,
if it works, you don't go, "Oh, I love this place because I get paid on time." You just expect it, and that's the whole point with these hygiene factors. And actually, in the first episode of the bonus extra about motivation, psychology of cults, I do talk about this. I think it's really interesting is that cults seem to defy this. They sort of turn it upside down because in the most cases, cults often treat people quite badly, really, but people still are motivated to do things like knock on people's doors or, service the leader in some awful way.
I suppose
it's quite interesting.
I suppose my two penneth on what's motivating there, despite the fact that there's these, you'd think quite a demotivating kind of place. It's the sort of belief in doing the right good thing and how important the work is, I suppose. Because if you think what you're doing is really valuable and important, I imagine that despite the fact that, okay, well, this could be better and that's not right, you can kind of try and push that aside because you know that ultimately what you're doing is really important and it matters. Because I feel like when you think your work doesn't matter, that's incredibly demotivating.
It is, but I think what this does is it throws doubt on Herzberg's model, which I think is quite interesting because it suggests that, everything you said is, of course, right, but his model doesn't allow for that. So his model, in this case, in the case of cults, they seem to demonstrate that this model isn't applicable in that sort of setting. There's something else going on. So what it might be, it might work in the workplace. When it comes to cultic organizations, that they bypass that in some way, which I think is really interesting.
You have your own theory? If Hertzberg's not doing it for you, do you have your own theory about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the theory of motivation that I'm really interested in, and it is an area that I wonder whether there's some PhD in this somewhere, but is related to a theory called self-determination theory by Deci and Ryan. So this is a bit of a newer, more modern theory, and this is again coming from the school that says let's look at people's deep motivations, so things that really deep at a human level. And they say that there are essentially three human needs, psychological needs. This is the need for autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And I think that's a really interesting set of things here. So autonomy is this ability to make your own choices, to be an autonomous person, have some agency. Competence is feeling that you are competent, that you are able to do something and you are competent at doing things. And relatedness is obviously the social need that we have to have other people that we are related to, whether that's family or friends or whatever. We all have this need for social interaction. So these three things are incredibly important to us, and they will drive us to do certain things in order to get more of them.
To be fair, when I was new at my job, I really missed being good at it.
Yeah, massively important.
Yeah, when, because you often, when you leave one job, especially when you change career, you go from being good at a thing to not being bad at it because you just don't know yet. I feel like, but it's that was probably one of my top motivators, was I just wanted to know the stuff again. I miss knowing things. That was great. When
if you think about
and ask you about something and you can be like, I know what to do. I can help you there.
Yeah. And if you think about starting a new job, it is a good example of this. So yeah, of course, competence is a big one. So that's why you feel demotivated in a new job, because it's hard and you're no longer competent to what you're doing. But also that leads to a lack of autonomy. So you don't have any ability to make decisions for yourself because you don't know what you're doing. And in other settings, it could be that. So this is where a lot of abuse comes in. So things like abusive, coercive control and so on, it is damaging your ability to make your own decisions and your own agency. Also abusive relationships, of course. That's why people feel so unhappy in these situations, because one of their most important psychological needs isn't being met. Relatedness, obviously, very important. And again, we start a new job, you don't know anybody. It's hard because you've left your friends behind. So these three, that's a nice illustration. I think in relation to cults, I think there's a lot of interesting elements here.
Well, I was almost thinking in some ways they're purposely trying to battle all of that up front. When you join, let's say, they don't want you to feel any of the quote unquote new job things like that, do they? They don't want you to feel, they want to break your autonomy because they want you to need them and rely on them, but they also don't want to demotivate you. You've got to love bomb and be excited and be super in at the beginning, haven't you? So it's interesting.
So don't forget,
they're going to do that.
Yeah, there's a difference between the promise or the offer and the reality. So the promise is that you will be this wonderful version of you, this self-actualized version of you. So and that probably includes autonomy. You are going to be this marvelous version of yourself. You might even be a spirit creature in heaven. And everything's going to be wonderful. So you're going to be highly competent. Angels are very competent, apparently.
Let's get that on a poster. Angels are very competent, and then on the back of the mug, it's a mug. It says apparently.
Yeah. So there is a promise of these things, and of course, I think the one thing that you do get to some degree is relatedness. So that's a deep psychological need. You want to be part of this group. You want to be friends with these lovely people who have the secret knowledge and seem to have everything together. So yeah, there is a promise of relatedness, and of course they are generally quite social cults. So you do build quite strong connections with other group members. Now, obviously, there's something wrong with those relationships, as we know, because they can be dropped. You can be dropped like a stone if you do the wrong thing. But that's where the fear comes in. So you want to maintain that relatedness, and so you're towards motivator, but you're away from motivator is fear of losing that. And so that's often how people are kept. But I think this is why people are unhappy in cults, although they might state that they're happy. I think often when people leave, they'll explain how they really felt, and there is a lot of anxiety. Certainly after a while, people feel anxious, and they're not it's not a psychological healthy place for people to be, because these three things are not being provided for them.
One thing as well is it's interesting is how there's lots of different motivational tactics going on simultaneously in a bit of a concoction, because it's kind of the thought of like, how do you maintain that level of all these different things all the time? It's because it's not all the time, is it? It's sometimes it's making you believe the dream, I guess, and sometimes it's threatening to take the dream away, and it's playing the cards right at the right times.
These are, as we said before, there's a process that people go through when they become a member. Now, of course, when you're raised into these groups, then there's no real need to recruit. You're raised to believe these things, and so even from a young age, your deep psychological needs are not being fulfilled.
Or being little Alfreded.
Exactly. Yeah. And obviously children have lower levels of autonomy. So part of the process of growing up is to feel increased sense of autonomy, and a healthy growth process is where the child gets more responsibility as time goes on, and more ability to be able to make their own decisions for their own lives, and so on and so on. In a cult, though, that's really curtailed, because there's strict rules about what you can do and what you can't do. And so things like your sexuality or your what you want to do for a living, and all these things are
it's just
controlled.
How you speak, how you behave, how you carry yourself. It's how you come across to anyone all the time.
And competence, I think, is an interesting one as well to just reflect on. So in some respects, being in a cult, you are very competent at being in the cult. You know how to do it. After a while, you become actually good at whatever it is that you're supposed to be doing. So there is an element there of competence.
And that adds to the fear, though, because that's another reason to liken it to a job as well. Sometimes you don't want to leave your current job, even if you're incredibly demotivated at your current job, you don't like it, but at least you know what to do. That's right. At least you're good at it. I mean, a common turn of phrase in England, like better the beast better the devil, yeah, exactly. So there's this thing where, especially like you say, if you've been raised in it or been in it for any number of years, you feel you're like, I've gotten quite good at this. I know what I'm doing. Even, for things you've said before, like even if it's not the truth, it's not a bad way of living.
Absolutely. It is the way I know, isn't it? And so, and that was my thinking process for many years, and was the recurring dream that I had for many years when I'd left. It was going back to that place where I thought, well, I can just stay being a witness, even
Follow
though I don't
along.
believe it. I'll just kind of be, I'll go to the meetings, and that I think
to
partly was that
through it,
and that need for relatedness as well. So again,
that's a strong. Very
Yeah.
strong motivator.
And those three together, the autonomy, competence, and relatedness, are essentially what intrinsic motivation is. It's fulfilling those three things. You get those three things right, and in the workplace, it's easy to see why that would be important. You want to feel like you've got some choices over what you do. You are good at what you do, and you feel part of something. And so, yeah, I think that's an interesting way to think about cults. There's another type of theory of motivation. It's called a process theory. In fact, there's a couple of those, but the one I wanted
psychologists, they really get spicy names, so they process theory.
Yeah, they're really
spicy.
It's all very very technical. But the guy that came up with this one is called Victor Vroom. What about that for a name?
Well, at least he's getting it a bit more jazzy with his name, Victor Vroom, and his process
if you're
theory.
Mr. and Mrs. Vroom, you've got to be some sort of cool
Come
dude.
on the wedding, you've got like on the back just Vroom Vroom, instead of just wed. God,
yeah,
Mr. and Mrs. Vroom Vroom.
I wonder if he married somebody called Veronica. That would be great, wouldn't it? Victor and Veronica Vroom. Anyway, we totally digress. So Victor Vroom came up with this thing called expectancy theory. And this is quite an interesting theory. So he basically said that there are three things: expectancy, instrumentality, and valence. So let me explain what those are. So expectancy is an individual's belief that his or her effort is going to lead to them being able to perform in some way. Okay, so that their effort will lead to some sort of good performance.
Right.
Instrumentality is an individual's belief that his or her performance will lead to some sort of outcome. So my efforts lead to some sort of performance. That performance leads to a set of outcomes. And the third thing, the valence, is that those outcomes are good outcomes. They're things that I want. So basically that's what expectancy theory is. Essentially, you have to have all three of those things together to be motivated.
I can agree. As in, so I know someone at I won't at nondescript workplace, but they would often say, they would often say, "What are you going to do? Fire me?" And that was the only thing that was like the final. Like they were just so unmotivated that they just stopped doing all things because expectancy. Yeah, they didn't. If they did a good job or not, it didn't matter.
Well, that's my point.
Yeah. So they were like, "What are you going to do? Fire me?" And immediately when you said about that, I was like, yeah. Once you realise that it doesn't matter, like if you do well or not, if you hit these targets or not, whatever, it's all just words and fluff. You kind of lose motivation, though.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
I guess that in cult stuff, then let's get into cult stuff about that.
Yeah. So let me say it again. Expectancy that the effort will lead to performance. Performance will lead to a specific outcome, and that I want these outcomes. That's basically expectancy theory. So, living forever on a paradise earth is the outcome, let's say. And yeah, do I want that? Yeah, definitely I want that. So that's the outcome I'm looking for. Do I think that working hard in the organization, knocking on a lot of doors, being a pioneer, doing all these things, do I think that all that effort is going to make me a better person? Maybe. And do I think that being a better person will lead to the outcome that I want? Well, that's what I was taught. And the outcome I want is living in a paradise. And so that is absolutely the way I think that a lot of these groups, work. That's really what's happening.
Does it have to fall down in an order? Can things fall down in whatever order for you to get demotivated? So I guess
it doesn't matter. They all three have to be.
They have to be happening together concurrently.
Together.
Yeah. So it's not like one happened so that the next one can happen. So the next one, cool.
I mean, you tend to think about it in those terms because it's just logical. But yeah, I mean, if you think, well, actually, my efforts will make me a better person, but being a better person won't give me the outcome I'm looking for, then what's the point? So that's where it'll fall down. So you have to have all three things together. It's worth the effort. That's the motivational bit. It's worth me putting in all this effort, because if I work hard, then that will make me a better person, and that will lead to the outcome I want, which is going to heaven, becoming a guru, owning your own planet, whatever it is. If you think that the effort's going to lead you to that, then you'll put the effort in. As soon as you stop thinking that, you're demotivated. And that's, of course, what happens when you start losing faith or you doubt the promise.
Or you even think, do I want the end goal? Do I want to live forever? And then you're like, if I don't want that,
if you don't want that anymore,
then what's it all? What are step 1 and 2?
But what I think is interesting about this, it's like cults have to, or these coercively controlling environments have to get the balance right. So on the one hand, they need you to keep trying. So they need to make you think that the expectancy has to be there, that the effort can lead to blah, blah, blah. On the other hand, though, they don't want you to get too comfortable and cocky, because they need to keep the fear in you that maybe you're not doing quite enough. So there's a sweet spot here that these groups keep you on the hook. And I think this so nicely describes how people feel in these groups. You have this promise, this expectancy of this wonderful future that you're looking forward to. And yes, you can do it. But then on the other hand, you're told how you're not good enough, you're not doing enough, and you're a hopeless sinner, and so on and so on. So there's a real battle going on there, and I think that's this horrible tension that you're living with in these groups.
And they're not. It is a battle, but they're two forms of motivation working together for the same goal of the group, the cult group there.
Yeah, I think so. So, it's a complicated picture. And often cognitive theories are quite complex because there's lots of...
Brains are complex.
There's lots of, mediators and moderators, things making it more so, things making it less so that you have to throw into the mix. That's why these diagrams become very complicated because there's all these factors that can affect. But essentially what cults are doing is they're playing around with these different forms of motivation, whilst at the same time, again, creating habits and automatic behaviors in people, like fear. We go back to little Albert and his rats and the fear that was given him by these associations. So you also have that as well.
So now we sort of talked about so much different kind of motivation, so much theories in the cult group and how cults are using those. Just to sort of finish off, could I ask you how you think post-cult, so basically motivation has been hijacked a bit in these cult groups, and they're using it to advantage of the group and disadvantage of you, the person. How do you think that affects a person's relationship with motivation and motivating oneself post?
That's a really good question, Celine. I really do. And I think that can be quite a struggle because you've not really had much opportunity to learn how to do that. One of the things that I did quite early on was got interested in goal setting. Now, goal setting theory. I
do remember you bloody loved a goal.
Yeah,
you still do. But...
I still do talk a lot about goals, but goal setting theory is something that is again another slightly different type of motivational theory, but it's a nice easy one and it's very conscious one. So you can think about this at a very conscious level. So right, okay, what do I want? So what outcome do I want? So you can do this in a very conscious way. You can say, right, what do I want to achieve? Why do I want to achieve it? What makes me happy? So I think you go through a process of your thinking, right, what do I actually want out of life? I've got this second chance, if you like. I've now come out of this group. I have opportunities now. So that's what I tended to do, is think, right, what do I want as a goal? And then you think about, right, how do I achieve that goal? And what sort of things, what sorts of effort do I need to put forward? So that for me is a useful tool, goal setting. And goal setting is shown to be actually quite an effective motivator in the workplace. A few conditions need to be met to make it so, but goal setting is a good one. But yeah, it can be difficult because if your motivation has been purely, an away from motivator because you don't want to die at Armageddon, or you don't want to be an evil person or whatever, when you leave, of course that's gone. So what's going to motivate you now? So that I think you can struggle a little bit post leaving.
So do you think with you, was it not necessarily about what goals you were setting or what you were trying to motivate yourself to do, just getting used to prioritizing your own desires?
Yeah, I think I think in a way it doesn't matter that much what the goals are. And it's important, I guess, for you to do a bit of soul searching and work out what makes you happy. But in some respects, you have to learn that as you go because you don't necessarily know that. So for me, I decided that I wanted to get a career, and then a bit later it was to get the degree, and then it was to get the master's, and I've always got a goal on, and that's because maybe I have to consciously do that because that's been the way that I got out of that funk I was in when I left, And
you said it's helped with the cycle to go full circle here, full bike wheel.
So as if all goes well, by the time our listeners are hearing this, I should be halfway through roughly the cycle. Now, if all doesn't go well, I could be at home at this point. But anyway, let's hope that
not for lack of motivation.
No, indeed.
Very much motivated. You're doing it.
Although I feel today it's interesting. So today is Wednesday the 30th. We're recording this a bit early, obviously, because I'm going to be away. So today I feel so demotivated. My energy levels have just sort of dropped massively.
Do you think it's because you've not been on the bike though? Because exercise gives the happy hormones, isn't it?
Well, I didn't go out yesterday, and I've not been out today, but I don't think it is that. I think it's more that one of the things that you have to get right when you're doing motivation is, or when you're thinking about motivating yourself, is that you can build up to a kind of crescendo. And I think maybe I've peaked a bit too early because I've been really stressed about it, very anxious about it. And at this point now, I've kind of stopped all of that. And maybe I've peaked a bit too early. But once I get started, it'll all come back again.
I think coming to a state of zen before is probably good.
It's not a bad thing, is it?
Yeah, I think you're at a state of peace. Go sit on the Wii Fit balance board and do the zen game. Just that's the goal. Get some of those electrolyte drinks in. Some more little oat bars.
Yeah, I've got everything I need. Right, okay. I reckon that's it. That's motivation done.
We will always all be motivated forevermore.
Indeed.
Nice.
There's much more to it. If you really want to know more motivational theories, I'm happy to bore you.
You can ask questions as well to the audience. If you have questions about motivation, you can ask on many platforms. We're Cult Hackers everywhere.
We're really pushing the Instagram now.
Instagram is very good.
Twitter's gone weird, and as we know, it's now called X, but
in the hands of a lunatic. So
but anyway, so we're sort of focusing. I do still post the episodes on Twitter, but we're using Instagram. Culthackers.com. I'm in the process of redoing the website, but it's our old evil sheep one up there. But go to the contact page and reach out. Can I also do a little bit of a plea for more ratings and in particular reviews on Apple?
Yes, we've not had
one for ages, and it would be great if you would do that. You don't actually have to have an Apple device or anything like that. You can just go onto the Apple podcast website and leave a review.
Look at that.
That makes a massive difference to us. So yeah, please, can you do that? If you wouldn't mind, that would be lovely. Thank you so much. Be motivated to feel all good and warm and fluffy that you've done something good.
We need to create a reward. If we get X amount of reviews, we'll do something. What is it you want, dear listeners, as a reward? I'll think of something if not, but choose your own reward.
Right, okay, I'm going now. It's going dark and you're disappearing. So
no lights for me.
I'm
Save
going
that,
to
Dosh.
go. Thank you very much for listening, everybody. And I just want to say, actually, before I go, thank you so much for everybody that has contributed onto the Just Giving page. I really, really appreciate it. And the money's going to the Family Survival Trust. So I really do thank you so much for doing that. That's helped to motivate me.
And as ever, it will be in the show notes to give money. So Dad's probably like 500 miles in to a slogfest of a cycle. Give him some money to his charity of choice.
So not me. We're not getting any
his charity of choice. Yes. Yeah.
Okie dokie. Thank you very much. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.